Hi everyone, welcome to another October here on Patreon. So as you probably know by now, Halloween is my favorite holiday and sewing for Halloween is one of my favorite things. So we make a big deal of this season here at Charm. And October, I always like to do a pattern that has costume possibilities, but is versatile enough that you could make it for other occasions as well. And I'm so excited that I have practiced delayed gratification on this one. I have waited many years, at least a decade more probably, to do this pattern. It is the red sequin gown that Marilyn Monroe and Jane Russell wear in the film Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. And it's called the Lorelei Gown after Marilyn's character in that film, which is my favorite movie, by the way. If you haven't watched it, please do. These gowns are the opening number and they're stunning. They're designed by William Trevia, who was well known for working with Marilyn for her entire career and designed some of her most iconic looks. So what is this gown? It's full length, very dramatic, has a high slit, dropped shoulder. It has a sheer inset panel between the bosoms. And we've done a lot of work to really give it that vintage shape so that it kind of like contours through the bust. We have sewn it in a sequin jersey. We're going to talk more about fabrics next. Underlined in power mesh for a lot of snatching and cinching. What else can I tell you? So it has these beautiful pleats, almost like pin tuck pleats in a starburst pattern on the skirt. And then we've also given you an optional panty. We spent a lot of time studying the original gown and trying to replicate very closely some of the details from it. And the originals had a built-in panty to really keep them in place vertically. And if you watch Jane and Marilyn dance in this number, those gowns are not going anywhere. Plus, it also gives you a little bit of modesty if your high slit opens up a little. So today you're gonna learn a lot of new skills. And I'm happy to tell you that Andrea is going to be sewing this one on camera. I had to take a little trip and Andrea stepped in, and for the first time you're going to be hearing Andrea as well. So thank you, Andrea, for stepping in. I also want to tell you that we had a little bit of an audio meltdown. Our microphone decided to completely die mid-filming, and so we are relying on audio from the other cameras. So I think it'll still sound good, but it may not sound quite as good as it normally sounds. So apologies for that, and we're gonna get it fixed for next month. Okay, so now we're gonna talk pattern pieces. So as usual, we have them all laid out on the tabletop, minimized so that we can see them all together. And I know there are a lot of pattern pieces in this one and they look complicated, so I'm going to talk you through it and hopefully it will all make sense. So right here in the middle, we have the bodice pieces. So bodice front, you're going to cut 2 fabric, 2 power net, and 2 lining, and same for the back. 2 fabric, 2 power net, 2 lining. And if you look at this front piece, you can see it has darts. This dart looks different depending on what cup size you make, so just keep that in mind. In the larger sizes, it is a cut out dart, but you're going to stitch along the marked line here. And then we have darts to match it to the insert piece. This little circle is pretty important because that is your pivot point, which you're going to reinforce and attach it to the back. This wraps around to become the back collar. This circle is going to be important because it matches to the front insert. On the insert, you're going to cut 2 of your sheer mesh. And you can see we have notches to match it to the front. This notch matches the seam line at 5/8 of an inch on the insert, and these circles match at the bottom here. And the interesting thing about this pattern is if you put these together, you would see a little bit of a dart cut out. It's like a fisheye dart. And the reason for that is we really wanted this to sort of contour to the body in between the bust. If you look at the Marilyn Monroe and Jane Russell videos, you'll see it was very snatched right here. So we were trying to really get that same contoured look, and that's the way that we did it. Okay, and then the back, we talked about that. It does have a back neckline dart, so just be mindful of that, and your usual back waist dart. Here is your sleeve, and it's worth mentioning that you don't have to sew the sleeve in. This could be a really cute little cap short sleeve. This is a dropped shoulder sleeve taken from the original gown. We took a lot of those details from the originals. And so you can see this has a slightly more flat sleeve cap than you're used to seeing, but it does have the same notches you're used to seeing. So this matches your shoulder seam, this is the front of sleeve, and then the double notch is the back of the sleeve. It does have this cute little point that sits on your hand right there. If you're not into that, you could just as easily smooth that line out. Let's look at the skirt pieces. So, for the front, it's asymmetrical. So you're gonna have a right front and a left front. Here's your right front. You're gonna cut one fabric and one lining, and same for your left front skirt. Now let's talk about these crazy looking darts. We're actually calling them more like pin tuck darts because they become so tiny at the point, which you can see, and they radiate out in a really lovely kind of starburst pattern. Now, what's tricky about these darts is for your outer fabric, you need to mark the fabric on the right side. So I would experiment with different marking tools. We found that friction pens worked really well for some fabrics like the velvet that you're gonna see Andrea sewing today, because you can also iron that and it will disappear, right? Or we also tried chalk pens, the kind with kind of powdery chalk inside that you can rub off. Whatever you use, you want to make sure that you are able to get rid of it because you don't want this to show on your finished gown. So for the outside of the gown, you want to mark those darts on the right side of your fabric. For the lining, you're going to mark them on the wrong side and sew them on the wrong side so that you have the wrong sides of the dart facing inside the gown on the lining. What else? So this circle here is for your slit. We actually sewed a little higher than that to make them a little sassier like the original gowns. That's a suggestion though. You can go higher because of the panty inside. You can play around a little bit more and you have that for coverage and modesty on the inside. Or if you want something that's a little more modest, you could sew down as far as you want on the leg. Until you get to the curve, of course. That's where you would want to open it up. You have marked lines for the shorter cocktail length version. And then your skirt back, 2 waist darts here. You have your zipper circle, and then you can see this lovely fishtail shape on the hem. This is going to give you that lovely train. If you don't want a train, you can hem it shorter, whatever you like. And then finally the panty pieces, and the panty is optional, but again, this was taken from the original gown. This is very much a more true replication than we normally do. And this is great actually because, you know, we would put the bodice on the dress form and it would look a little bit like it was riding up at the waist. But then if you have this vertical anchor of the panty, it will hold it really top to bottom, and your waistline will stay exactly where it needs to be. And also this is a nice full coverage panty. So it's almost like a bloomer. I used to play field hockey in high school and we would wear these little bloomers that were basically like big granny panties that give you a lot of coverage. And this really reminded me of that. So it's cute. We did some photos. You can see in the photo shoot, there's one where you can actually see a little bit of the panty underneath, you know, when I'm sitting, and like, that's kind of the intent for something like a costume, right? So it gives you a little more coverage. So front and back panty, you're going to cut both on the fold, cut 1 each of your lining fabric. And then this is also optional. This is a power net panel, just to give you a little tummy control if you like. So you would cut 1 on the fold of power net, and then it gets stitched to the inside of the panty, almost like a panty girdle, like an old-fashioned panty girdle. So those are all your pattern pieces. I promise it's not as hard as it looks. We're going to take you through every step. So next, let's talk fabric and supplies. Okay, we're ready to talk fabric and supplies. As always, please consult the written instructions for more detail, but I'm going to give you some of the options. So this gown I designed for stretch fabrics. The original actually was in a woven. It was in silk chiffon with sequins on top, but that's kind of hard to find these days, but you can find a lot of great sequin knits. So that's why we made the decision to do a stretch version. So this is the exact fabric we used for the red sequin replica gowns. And this is a squiggle sequin because it's stitched in a squiggle pattern. This is also called a vermicelli stitching pattern, by the way, I just learned that. And this is on spandex, okay? So you're looking for a fabric that has about 25 through 50% stretch in the widthwise direction, and then very little to no stretch in the lengthwise direction. You may also find sequins on stretch mesh. They tend to be a lot stretchier, so this one would probably be too stretchy, but I did just want to let you know that you will see some sequins on stretch mesh and some on spandex. If you're looking for something a little simpler to sew, Panty would be a great choice. This is a nice, stable knit, much easier to sew, especially if you're less experienced. You have those tiny little dart pin tuck things. This is going to be easier to sew those details with. Finally, you could do something like a velour or stretch velvet. Okay, so if you do decide to use a stretch velvet, and Andrea is going to be sewing stretch velvet on camera today, you are going to want to be very careful of the nap, making sure the nap goes in the same direction in all your pieces, and also pinning your seams very carefully because velvet can wiggle around a lot when you stitch those seams. You're going to need some sort of illusion mesh for that sheer panel on the inside. We have used this quite a bit for different projects. This is a sheer illusion mesh. I buy it from Etsy. It comes in a lot of different skin tones, which is amazing because you can match it to yourself or whoever you're sewing it for. As you can see, it's the kind of thing that like ice dancers would use. You know, you see this a lot in like gymnastics, costumes, that sort of thing. But it was also really common in 50s illusion neckline dresses. So the insert is going to have 2 layers of this because it's self-lined. Now, you could also make the choice to do another sheer fabric for a little bit of a different look. You could do this flocked mesh with these little polka dots. I think this would be so cute. Now, in this case, you might want to line it with a nude illusion mesh because it does have a lining. Or if you want to get some coverage and be able to wear a bra in that insert, then I would recommend getting some spandex, some opaque spandex that matches your skin tone, and then that becomes the lining for the insert, and then you can wear whatever bra, corset, etc. you want to wear under this dress. Another option would be this, I love this holographic sequin. We bought these for the Bathing Beauty swimsuit, so this would be a nice option for that insert. You're going to need some heavy power net. Okay, so power net is heavier and used for foundation garments, for structure, and power mesh is much stretchier. So power net is for underlining the bodice and getting that structure and cinching effect in the bodice. And then finally, you're going to need lining. We used a lighter spandex for our lining, but you're going to make sure that it has the same stretch properties as your outer fabric. Final bits and bobs, you're going to need, as per usual, your 1¼ inch wide stabilizer tape for the zipper. Pico elastic, if you're doing the optional panty, this will finish the legs, the leg openings. Your all-purpose polyester thread, stretch needles, very important. An invisible zipper, we very rarely use invisible zippers here at Charm, but it's great for this gown because it disappears up the back, and especially in something like sequins or a knit, I like an invisible zipper. And you're gonna wanna make sure to have an invisible zipper foot for this. It makes it much easier to get a more invisible finish because you can get closer to the zipper itself and have it disappear in your seam. Also optional, you can do a snap crotch opening on the panty if you like. I prefer to just sew that seam shut, and then if I have to use the ladies' room, I would just drop the whole gown. I hate a snap crotch, but a lot of people like it. So if you do want to use a snap crotch opening, we have instructions for that as well in the written PDF instructions. And then finally, another optional touch would be an elastic waist stay on the inside of the dress. If you feel like you try it on and you're just wanting a little more cinch at the waist to get that very hourglass showgirl look, then you can insert an elastic waist tape, a little smaller than your waist measurement, which just is gonna pull everything in and give you more of an hourglass. So that is it, your fabric and supplies. Andrea is going to be sewing on camera for you today, and she's also going to be doing the audio as well. So she's going to be speaking in real time for the first time. I'm very excited. And also thank you to Andrea for doing this. I had to take a last minute trip and she filled in for me. And I know you all are going to love seeing her on camera and hearing her on camera this time. All right, so let's get sewing.
Hi, friends. This is Andrea. I'm so excited to be here with you today. I am going to actually do the sewing and the instructions for our Lorelei dress and our Lorelei bodice. And this is really exciting. So let's get started. Okay. The first thing that you want to do is that the entire bodice is actually underlined in Power Net. And underlining means that you're layering two pieces of fabric together, and then you are going to treat them as one. So one thing I want you to notice about this is that we haven't actually put our markings onto our bodice front. We're going to be making a stretch, hot pink stretch velvet Lorelei, which feels very exciting. And what we're going to do is we put all of our markings onto our Power Net because that's where you're going to actually be sewing. And so you want to line this up, make sure everything is sitting correctly. And then you're going to go through and you're going to pin this together along all of our edges. Okay, so we have our underlining pinned. I like to flip it over and make sure I just didn't catch anything. See here, it's a little caught, so I'm gonna just go back and make sure that's smooth. Make sure there. And so we're gonna sew this with a long stitch, with a 5mm stitch, probably 4 to 5 millimeters. And you want to do this at 1/2 inch from the seam allowance. This way all of your underlining disappears. Now I've put my stretch velvet on the bottom here. And I've done that just to make sure, the feed dogs can be a little bit easier than the presser foot. So when I'm underlining, I like very much to, whenever I have a pivoting point that is complex, like the edge of this dart seam allowance, I like to cut my thread and not round an edge. So you'll see what I mean here. So here I'm going to run off the edge. And I do this so that if you try to pivot in that corner, it can pucker and you can get a bubble. So in order to keep this underlining as neat as I would like it, I'm gonna make sure to, oops, oh gosh, this is what I get for removing my pins, guys. Okay, here, Okay. So underlining takes a little bit, but what it's going to do is it's going to give you extra support all through the bodice of this dress. Okay, so here is our Lorelei bodice. One of the things about the Lorelei bodice is that we have two different kinds of darts that we're doing as our waist darts. So I am making an FG cup. So by making an FG cup, I have a cutout dart. If you have an A through C cup, you're going to have a dart that looks more like this with the fabric still inside of the dart itself. But let's talk about sewing this cutout dart. So one thing with the underlining, especially with these 2 layers of stretch, is that you want to be really, really sure that you are catching that fabric, the outer fabric, into the very tip of this dart. You don't want to have it extend. So here, I'm just making sure I'm following that line exactly. And then my other pins, I can pin in the way I regularly pin darts, which is across the seam that I'm about to sew. Okay, and I place this first dart at the tip, this first pin, at the tip of this dart so that I have a fold point. And a point, you'll watch me extend this out so that I can go ahead and make absolutely sure that I am sewing this dart precisely. So these darts, we're going to sew all the side seams and everything with zigzags, but these darts we're going to sew, oops, my stitch length is too long. We're going to sew all these darts with a straight stitch, just for the cleanliness of how those darts look. I stitch that right up to the pin. I want to leave a tail on that dart. And then I want to tie that tail off. Okay. Then the next step for this is that I am going to clip here up to the tip of the dart because I want to press this open. So I'm going to go press that open and we'll come back to sew our other dart. Okay, so I have pressed our dart open, making sure that I press into the tip of the dart that we clipped. And now I'm going to show our bust dart. Now this is something I know you've seen a lot of times on our charm tutorials. So again, I want to make absolutely sure that we have the power net and the stretch velvet going all the way to the edge. You could, I think that you could probably stitch inside of this dart if you wanted to. But I felt like, oops. See, that's probably why you want to do that. Okay, here I'm gonna pin the clips together at the end. Let's make this a little bit easier. Okay. There, I'm going to add an extra pin just to make sure all my layers stay lined up properly. Okay, and again, similar to our other dart, we we want to do this dart with a straight stitch. So I like to pull that all the way out to the edge. Okay. And here again, we want to make sure our dart is sewn beautifully. Okay. So at the end of the dart, I have my tails. And again, I want to lock those threads. Okay. And then here, I'm going to put this on top of my ham. And using some steam. I checked this to make sure it wasn't going to melt, but you do want to do like a fabric test and maybe just spill like a ton of water while you're doing this. That's nice. Okay, so there we go. We have our dart pressed down. I am going to go take care of the darts on my back bodice. We have a back waist dart, but it's exactly the same principle that you do for this dart. So you should be good to go, and it'll give me a little time for our ironing board to dry. Okay, so I have sewed both of our darts, which are exactly the same principle as we used to do our bust dart. You sew to the end, leave a thread tail, tie the thread tail off, and then trim it. I also use this for our shoulder dart, which gives really great shaping on this bodice. Okay, so we're going to move this out of the way. One thing I wanted to mention is that I'm demonstrating this on our fashion fabric, our underlined fashion fabric, but really you want to remember that you're also doing this for all of the lining pieces as well. So this step is really quite small, but super important. So you are going to take your center front of your bodice, which is kind of it's an interesting shape because we have some bust room built into it, but it's where you're going to put your illusion neckline or your opaque neckline if you choose. So we are going to line up our notches here in our circle. And we are going to stitch this. I'm going to sew this with a narrow zigzag, 1.5 millimeters by 2.5 millimeters from this circle to the bottom, leaving the rest of it open so we can go ahead and create our illusion neckline. Okay, so here I'm going to slide this under. When you backstitch, you want to make sure you don't backstitch too far, especially on this, because this is going to be very important for inserting our neckline, or illusion neckline. Okay, so I've locked those threads. I'm going to trim that. Okay, so here we are. We're just kind of connected here right at the bottom. And then the last thing I'm going to do, I'm going to clip in to that seam. I'm going to press that open. None of these irons love this very much. I had to switch out my iron because it's soaked it was leaking and soaking the table. So we're trying this one out. This one's going to be so much better for us. Okay, so there we go. There is step 6. You're going to repeat this on your lining, and then we're going to move on to our illusion neckline. Okay, so we have our bodice here. It's stitched right from the notch down, the lower circle down to the bottom of the bodice. Okay, so here you can just barely see these. These are our illusion net, and this is something we discussed in our instruction, in our supplies and materials chapter. But okay, so this sewing falls into my category of this is like sewing a cloud. You want to be really sure. We're gonna see a little of my head while I line this up. That you are matching this up perfectly. Okay, here we go. And this is like pinning, illusion net is like pinning tulle. So I tend to put a couple more pins than I would probably normally put because, oops, wow, that was stabby. Okay, just to make sure I'm really holding it in place properly. And so this, similar to the darts, because we want a really clean finish on this neckline, and we're going to be able to see what seam allowance is left after we trim it, we're going to want to make sure that we sew this on a straight stitch, okay? So my best advice for this is to just go slow. If you were sewing this and it feels really tough to keep it in place, you could also pin this to some paper, to some tissue paper, and that would help you. Okay, so I've got this sewn, and then just to make sure that you really have a well-sewn seam, and because of how close we're going to trim this, we are going to position this 1/8 into our seam allowance. So you're doing this at 1/2 inch. If it's easier to look at 1/2 inch and not look at 1/8 from your sewn seam, you could do that as well. Okay, so we have our 2 lines of stitching here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim directly next. It's so hard to see. Trim directly next to that second line of stitching. Okay, so what this means is that we can turn it to the right side now. This is rolling so much, I'm just going to put a pin in while I sort out the other side. Okay. I'm a little worried about melting this. So, oh, good. This iron's also sputtering. Well, it's perfect, guys. Okay, anyway, I didn't press all the way down when I did that because I was a little worried about it, about getting just a little bit of melting because of this synthetic fabric. But I have gone ahead and I kind of like hovered and steamed and kind of like lightly touched it to give it that. So then I'm going to go through and I'm going to baste these two sides together all the way down. And let's see here. Okay, so we've got both sides pinned there. So here, I'm going to actually choose to do this with a little bit of a zigzag at 1/2 inch. I think this is a known thing if you've seen me sew in other videos, but I'm pretty bad about sewing over pins. Illusion net is one of those places you really do not want to sew over pins because the fabric is so light that I find it wobbles and moves, and even with silk pins, I find that you don't get an accurate line. So here's my one place where it's worthwhile. No, I'm joking. Always take your pins out. You don't want to break a needle, shatter a pin. We've got one side. Okay, so there we are. We have our illusion neckline sewn, and we'll come back in our next step and insert this into our bodice front. Okay, so I have sewed my lining. This is both for my center front circle. I've done all my darts. And now we're going to insert this illusion net. And we're going to do this by sandwiching it between the two layers. So I'm going to start, you can start on whichever side you want, right? Okay, so we're going to start with this on the right side as worn. And it's a little bit difficult to see on this net, but I've marked that circle. And I put a pin in there just so I can see it once it's against the pink fabric. I'm just going to pin through all the layers there. And then I'm going to pin, matching my notches on my, matching the notches on my illusion net to the notch on my stretch velvet. And then here, we have a notch up here, and this is where the neckline is attached to. So I'm going to just mark this, put this in a couple of places, pin it, and then I'm going to pin on top of it, moving the pins to make sure I'm lining all my layers up correctly. Okay, so the other thing about this is we are thinking about the right side as worn, and we want the right sides together on this lining because when we fold it back to the interior, we're going to have a clean finish then. So again, I want to go right to my circle. Pull out this extra. Throw it there for good measure. Okay, let's line up my notches perfectly. We're going to line my notch up here. And then we're going to go all the way to the end of this neckline seam. So this is the collar that comes around the back of the neck. So we're going to go right to that raw center back edge. And then once I've marked all those, pinned all of those points, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pin in between. More pinning than I did on that when I was just kind of like making sure nothing rolled around while I put this lining on. Okay. Any pins that I have between the two layers, I'm lifting out. Like this one that I missed and can see right there. Okay, so when I sew this, I'm going to sew from the center back raw edge to the circle. I want to stop exactly at that circle, back stitch, and then we're going to come back to braid. So we're going to come back and sew this, let's start again, with a slight zigzag. My needle is down. So there we go. And then I'm going to flip this around. We have that seam stitched. I always like to open it up and just make sure there are no puckers anywhere. Everything looks good. And then I'm going to braid this seam. Okay, so we're grading to just minimize any kind of bulk here. The illusion net is so thin, I'm not quite sure that you need to worry about the bulk of it. Like I said, it like barely feels like it's there. But I would say it's good to get into this habit for best practices. And I'm grading my fashion fabric and my underlining, my power net, the longest. Okay, so I have all of those done. And now I'm going to go through, I'm actually going to use a straight stitch here, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to understitch these two layers, putting a little bit of tension on them. I'm going to understitch them with a straight stitch. I think we'll be okay here, and then as I'm understitching these, and I'm understitching about 1/8 from the edge, my thumb underneath is making sure that my seam allowance is all pressed towards my lining side here. And I'm kind of giving just a little pull, just the tiniest bit of tension to make sure that I'm opening the seam as much as possible. Okay, so stop with needle down. And then I'm gonna flip my illusion net out of the way because I don't want that to get caught in the seaming. Okay, and then this understitching. I'm going to grab my sleeve board for this. Oh, wow. Never used this sleeve board, guys. Jeez, it's a fancy one. Okay. And what I want to do when I'm doing this is making sure that that seam is pressing. I actually need to flip this over if I'm going to do it in a way that makes most sense to me, which is kind of that I'm rolling this seam. And then I was so silly there, and I only did my illusion neckline. I didn't do up here, so I wanna, there we go. Okay, so 1/2 of our illusion net done, and I will be back to do the other half. Okay, I've gone ahead and done the second side, but here's where I have to fess up, which is that I'm human like everyone else. And despite my warnings to you to not go ahead and make sure you iron your illusion net because it could melt. Can you see it? Can you see it? I melted the illusion net because I'm a fool. Okay, anyway, so what I wanted to mention is that I put this hole into the under layer of the illusion net. And I decided upon pausing to clean my iron with my bow and iron cleaner, have some Diet Coke and check in with Gretchen, that what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to continue with this bodice. And then I will make a little reel how I'm going to triage this, because I think I'm going to make a small panel with a rolled hem on the sides, and I'm going to cut out this under panel and then stitch it in. But we'll see what I really arrive on. Anyway, we all make mistakes. You could undo everything. You could recut everything. I've decided to move forward, and I will work on my plan a little bit after. So that should be fun. All right. Thanks, guys. So after my little snafu here, we're going to go ahead and move on to the shoulder seam. So I'm opening my lining out. We are going to go ahead and I'm going to do one of these on camera, but this is one of those steps that you get to do 4 times because we have our lining and we have our lining and our outer fabric. Okay, so I'm matching this up here. From the circle to the edge. Okay, so again, we want our zigzag seam. Make sure your lining is out of the way so you don't catch that. And I like to take my time making sure I really get that circle. Okay, so here we're going to go through, we have our shoulder seam sewn. Again, I like to always check. Things look good. I'm going to clip here. Okay, and I'm going to press this shoulder seam open. Luckily, this is the stretch velvet, which I don't have to worry about melting, but I'm going to be a little careful here. Okay, so then our next step, I'm going to take us into the next step of the directions, which is that we want to sew the collar to our back neckline. So with that clip, that's going to help us line things up. Oops. Okay. And I want to fold my little shoulder dart. I want to fold that, or neckline dart, towards the center back and make sure I'm pinning it correctly so it doesn't get caught in the opposite direction. Okay. And then this is where you really want to make sure that you pin very thoroughly. I like to go in. I want to make sure I have no puckers here. See, I'm puckering a little on the back side there. No puckers. And then I'm going to put a pin right on that edge to make sure I can match up the circle here when I'm sewing, because that's how you're going to make sure you don't have like a hole at the edge of the collar. Okay. So back to my machine. Again, make sure everything is out of the way. This needle, because this pin, because it's holding the seam allowance in the correct direction, I won't move till I'm right at the presser foot. And I want to hold everything very carefully through here. Okay, so we have our seam allowance. And there we go, right? So we have this seam so that we can turn the corner at the shoulder and come around the back of the neck. And then to reduce bulk on this, one thing we decided to do was to actually fold this seam allowance on the back neck, to fold this and press it up and down. I'm going to notch that in a second, but I just want to give this a little press. Because this will help you when you are inserting an invisible zipper through stretch, all kinds of stretch materials, right? So I'm going to just clip this, maybe notch it so that it lays correctly. And I'm going to now go ahead and repeat this on all of my other pieces. So we've got 2 lining pieces and 1 more back that we're going to attach now. So we have our front and our back collars sewn on, our shoulder seams all done on our lining and on our fashion fabric. So now we want to attach the side seams. This is really very straightforward. So you're going to attach right sides together. I like to sew this from the arm's eye down. So I'm going to line up my notch with my dart. And the notch sits a little bit above where the dart is on the seam allowance edge, the raw edge, because what we're lining it up to is exactly where the dart crosses the stitch line. And then I match my arm size. I match in between there. I match our waistline. And then I always like to pin through the dart at least once just to hold it so we don't get any kind of buckling or anything like that. So right now we've got one sewn edge and then all of the other floppy edges. So we're going to go ahead and we are going to sew this and leave the rest of this octopus, 4-leaf clover, I don't know quite what to call it, out. So we have our seam here. Some more water sputtering for good measure. I'm giving this a fair amount of steam because I find this doesn't like to stretch, to press open very much. Okay, so we've got our side seam sewn. I'm going to repeat that for the other side seam, and then I'm going to repeat that for the 2 lining pieces, and then we will come back. So I have our bodice is completely together now, which is so exciting. It means we're a good part into this dress. I know this dress has a lot of steps, but I really think it's worth it and has so many fun details. Okay, so we are looking, here's the right side of the fabric, we're looking at the wrong side of the fabric. We're gonna start with something very simple, which sounds lovely. So we're gonna match our notches. And we're gonna pin our stretch velvet. One of the things about stretch velvet that I find is that it doesn't, because there's a nap to it, it doesn't quite want to nest together. It wants to slide off and not have the seam allowances line up. So take the time, and I kind of I try to squish them in like they're Velcro, which I think may sound really funny, but because you have nap on both sides, I try to give them a little smush so they hold together to help me when I'm pinning. Okay, so we have our sleeve together. Note that the sleeve, the wrist has a point that is going to sit on the top of your arm here. So that's why we have that little point there. Okay, let's come over to our machine. We want to make sure again that we're on a narrow zigzag. Okay. We need our sleeve board. One of the things about this sleeve is that it's quite fitted. So depending on the size of your sleeve board, it may be a little bit hard to press, but I slid it on. It's a stretch, so it can take this. And I'm gonna press it. There we go. Okay. So there we go. We have our pressed seam. Then I am going to grab my lining. And I'm going to place these right sides together, which means I should turn this wrong. And what am I doing? Holy moly, guys. What a day. Okay, so I am going to leave my sleeve the way it is because that's the way it should be. I'm going to line up my seam, my underarm seam. You know, I'm actually going to pin this from the lining side, which feels like you're pinning it inside out, but one thing about this sleeve is that on the machine we're sewing on, the we can't actually fit this around the arm. It would be nice if I listened to myself while I was talking. Okay, I'm going to pin on this side. I want to make sure I match this point really well because I want to make sure that I can get that crisp point when I'm sewing. Okay, so here. So there we are. We have our outer sleeve and our lining lined up, right sides together. And I'm going to come here, and I think one of the important things to note about this is that you want to go slow because you're kind of sewing in the round. Is that a good way to put it? Always end needle down if you can. This way it stabilizes your fabric so it doesn't pull out at all. Okay, so we have that part done. Then we're going to go through and I'm going to grade. Oh my gosh. Okay, let's do this. Let's do this like this. I want to grade the lining. I can't figure out how to hold this to make it easy, guys. Oh my gosh, okay, let's see. Okay, there we go. Then the one last thing is to just cut and trim right next to that point. Okay, so one of the things about this seam is that it's impossible to really machine understitch this. We put a note in the instructions about this, but you could hand understitch it if you wanted. But I'm going to go ahead and just press it. So now I'm going to go on and I'm just going to baste these two together, matching up my notches and just stitching them into one. And what you'll end up with is this. So this is the sleeve, but what we've done is we've attached the lining and the sleeve itself at the arm's eye, which is going to make it easy to sew into our bodices. We have our bodice sewn. Our lining is hanging free from the arm, the center back, and the waist, but we're attached at center front. And we have our two sleeves sewn, basted at the top edge so that we will treat them as one. So let's get started. You want to make sure you have the your sleeve here. I have I'm going to put right sides together. I have the back of my sleeve, which is our double notch. And I'm attaching this only to my outer fabric. I am not attaching this to my lining at all. So you want to make sure you're pushing the rest of everything out of your way. Okay, we want to match up our notches. And then I like to pin between those notches. Okay, we have, make sure your seam allowance is open here. We have our shoulder notch, which is going to line up with our shoulder seam. Okay, so our sleeve is pinned in. We're going to bring it to our machine. Okay, so I'm just going to make sure You really want to go through and make sure you don't have any tucks or anything like that. Our seam matches up. I want to make sure all of that is taken care of before I grade these seams. So here we go. It's another one of these guys. Okay. So I'm going to grade my lining. Smaller. Okay, then I'm going to grade. This is 3. Okay, the last thing I like to do is from where my notch was, even with the grading, I like to clip in every ½ inch. Okay, so, okay, sleeve number 1 is done. I'm going to give this just a little press towards the sleeve itself, and I'm going to set in my second sleeve. Finished our bodice, and now we're going to move on to the, excuse me, the internal panties that go with this. Now these panties are optional, and the reason we put them in here is not to act as underwear for the person wearing it, but rather to stabilize the front, and basically like make sure everything stays in place on this. So you can make the choice to add this or not add it. It's totally up to you, but it does make it it does help with stability just a little, especially with the long gown. Okay, so we have our panty back, our panty front, and then we have our very small power net panel. So this power net panel is where we're going to start. So we marked with a friction pen here the 5 points of this panel, and then you want to line up your power net, and then you're going to stitch this on with a wide zigzag. So we're going to use like a 2.5, 2.5, and I'm going to go right on the edge of this panel. We're making our panties out of the same fabric that we're doing all of our lining out of, for consistency. Okay, so let's go over to our machine. We have a 2.5. And I have repaired the bobbin. We are going to start just a couple stitches back. So now we have our panel stitched, so we can go ahead and we'll move on to attaching the elastic to our back panty panel. So the first thing we want to do when we look for attaching the elastic to the panties is I am just going to measure this. So we have 16 inches across the back, and then 16 times 0.85 equals 13.6. For ease, I'm probably going to make this 13.5 inches because it doesn't matter that much if you're off by like, you know, a very tiny bit. So 13.5 inches is the length of elastic that I need. It would be ideal if I didn't throw my tape measure under there. Okay, so let's hold this out. And 13.5 right here. Okay, so I have clipped my elastic. The rest of our elastic, I'm not going to put this away yet because we are going to use it for our leg circumference, which is going to use that same 85% method. So when we do this, we want to pin right against that seam allowance because we've adjusted the seam allowance to match the piece, match the elastic. So this is 1/4 inch picot elastic. You want the prettier side of the elastic is what should be facing towards your panties, because when you make these in our double sew method, what's going to actually happen is you are going to fold this elastic under, and that is going to give you a clean edge. So I'm just giving you my method. I think I think everyone probably has their own way that they approach this, but I like to just stretch it, pin, then here, make sure that stays. Stretch the remaining amount. So theoretically, I'm stretching this, I'm getting a really even application of the elastic. I think some people probably stretch it, but I like to have some just like minor spots to help me make sure I'm getting it correct. So what this will do is that the back of the panty hangs free, and what this allows for is for you to be able to slip it on and off instead of having the zipper go through it, which seemed like a lot of added bulk. So the front panty is attached into the front panty is attached into the waist seam, and this panty is not. So I'm going to center on my elastic, on the wide part of my elastic, not including my picots. Okay. Okay, so I'm stretching this to make sure these two match. Whoops, caught on my dress. Okay. So we have our panty. The elastic is stitched. We're going to turn this. Actually, I want to sew this from the picot side. Needle down in this case. Oh, we're a little caught. Let's see. So when we're doing this sewing, we want to be really sure to pull the elastic taut. Okay, elastic in. So there we go, and we have a clean panty edge. This is similar to our Vargas panties. Okay, and then let's clip our threads. We've sewed both passes of our panties. I've got them right here. And then there's one last step that we want to do, which is that we want to use just a little bit of steam to just shrink the elastic in. There we go. Okay, so we are going to come back and we will sew our side seams and then get ready to do our leg elastic. So we have our back panties. This is our right side, and our front panties are right side. And now we're going to attach the side seams. And you know, this is something I would normally do off camera, except that these particular panties have seam allowance on the front, but not on the back. And I'm matching them here so that they'll match at the seam line at 5/8. We have a little tail. And then here, we're gonna match these, which will also match at 5/8. We're gonna do the same thing on this side. So we have these two side seams together. And then we've got one more side here. Okay, so I will bring my panties here, press this seam open, on both sides. Okay, so we are set with the first part of our panties. I'm going to go through, and here on the leg, I'm going to apply that picot elastic in exactly the same way that we did before, right? I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pin it 85% of the length, which will be the length of the elastic, 85% of the length of the leg circumference. And I'm going to apply this right side to right side so that when I flip it, we get the prettiest, cleanest edge possible for our picot elastic. And when I've completed that, we're going to come back and apply our snap tape. So here we are, where again we have our panties. I have kind of I've steamed in the elastic, and we've applied the elastic to both of our legs. So this is where we would apply our snap tape, but we did a quick consultation. I talked with Gretchen, and that's not something she likes to have. So instead, I'm going to do an alternate finish for this, but please see the instructions on the snap tape in the panty in our written instructions, and then know also that we have another set of written instructions in the skipper. I think that video may actually have the instructions for doing the snap tape in the crotch as well. So this is incredibly straightforward because of how we're going to deal with this. I am going to pin these together. Pinning through the elastic to make sure I'm lining it up. And I'm pinning the middle. And what we're going to do is we're just going to sew this at 5/8, and we're going to, right now I'm going to press it open. I may go ahead and serge it later. The annex has many wonderful things, but we haven't gotten a serger up here yet, so I have to do that off-site. Okay, we're going to go with our narrow zigzag. So there we go. Panties are constructed, and we are ready to move on to our skirt. Okay, so here is the back of our skirt. We're going to do our 2 sets of darts on the back. We've divided it because this dart would have to be so large. We've divided it into 2 darts. So this is exactly the same as the bust dart that we did, the back shoulder dart. You want to line up your clips, your notches, and then take your time pinning through to make sure you're really getting precision. And I said this earlier, but I really think this pin is like very important to the accuracy of your dart. Oops, a little off. Okay. I'm going to pin my second dart as well. This is different from what I'm going to do when we get to our skirt front. So again, because of these darts being vertical, I'm going to do these with a straight stitch just for the the clean look of the dart. And I keep that pin in and I slide it to the very edge just to make sure that I don't end the dart early. If you end the dart early, you can end up with a little bit of a pucker. So you want to make sure you go all the way to the edge of where that dart is placed. This is going to become really, really important when we get to our darts on the front skirt. Okay, so I've got my 2 darts sewn. Let me start heating my iron while we do this. If your threads are tangled, I use a pin to separate them. Tie both my darts off. Okay, I'm gonna clip my threads. And then, oopsie, I forgot to put the fusible stay tape on this, but I'm going to do that right after this. And you want to press both of these towards center back. Okay, so there we go. We have our 2 darts. Let's flip this so that you can see it right side up. We have our 2 darts. Here's our center back, and we are going to move on to our front darts. All right, friends, so here we are at the front darts, which are one of the main features of this skirt. So I'm showing you the right front as worn outer fabric and the right front lining. When you put these together, the darts on the outer fabric, your fashion fabric, are on the outside of our skirt. The darts that you want on the lining, because you don't want the darts against your body, you're going to want to sew. So this is actually the side that will be against your body. But one of the reasons I wanted to show this is because you can see the general form of what we're going to be doing, right? So we're taking all of these tiny darts, which are really more like pin tucks in a way, once you get about halfway. We're taking those to bring this up, which is going to leave a curved hip, but bring our waistline into a level line. Okay, so there's a couple tricks to doing this. One is you have to mark your fabric on the top. Here, we've done it with a friction pen, which when you iron it, all of these marks will disappear. So the other thing is that I found that sometimes, depending on your fabric, marking the lines all the way, like with a tracing wheel and wax paper or something, is incredibly hard to get the precision of the darts. So we provided a circle at the end of each dart, and you're going to go ahead and mark each of these circles. And then here, mark the edge of each dart. You can see we've marked those circles and also clipped into each one. And that is going to help you. The other thing about these darts is because they're so close together, you have to pin each dart individually. I'm going to pin one dart, sew it. I'm going to pin the next dart, sew it. I'm going to show you how to sew one of these darts, and then we're going to come back and I'm going to show you the pressing, because interestingly, we press these darts up, right? Which is going to give you like a really dynamic look on your skirt. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to start with my top dart. This line here, this circle, I'm going to put a pin through. Here I'm going to match up my 2 notches, making sure I go right through the piece, right through the fabric and the lines. Obviously through the fabric. That would be insane otherwise. Okay, so here I'm just marking. I kind of use my pin to feel around, making sure I get the bottom correct. I go through the bottom and then I'm going to kind of like wiggle till I get a perfect line. So when you get, so about here, this feels like a normal dart, right? But as you get over here, it's a little bit more complex. It's not much more complex. This is totally doable. I've done a lot of these. Take your time with it. The straightness of your sewing here is going to be really important for getting the effect of these these radiating darts. Okay, there we go. And then here, even though I'm basically like edge stitching, I am going to put another pin because I just want to make sure I have as much accuracy. I'm pinning like, I don't know, less than a 1/16 of an inch. It's amazing I've gone further than the nap there. But we want to make sure we're pinned all the way so that we can be truly accurate with this dart. Here we go. I made sure, again, we're dealing with straight stitches. We say this in the instructions, but I do think that if you really want to get into like a dart groove, you can go ahead and do these darts when you're doing all of your bust darts. Like there's something a little satisfying about just sitting down and sewing all 48 of your darts. And then once those are done, you can get going on the actual construction of your bodice. So I'm kind of holding that line to make sure we are precise. This is a great one to really make sure that when you stop, take your time and practice stopping with your needle down. And if you don't, turn your wheel so that your needle is down before you pull the next one. You don't want any jagged edges here because you really want to make sure you have precision. Okay, so this is where it's going to get a little complicated. I'm going to pull this out. I am just basically edge stitching here. Okay. I'm going to leave a long tail here. Okay. So, the first of our darts is done, right? I have left a really long tail here because because you're sewing this on the top of your skirt, what you need to do is you need to pull these threads through, which you can do in 2 ways. You can kind of like pull through from here. Do not lock your stitches. But I actually found, especially on the sequin fabric, because pulling thread tails through that was a real pain in the butt. So what I ended up doing is I left the tails long enough that I could put each tail onto a hand sewing needle, and then I just sew that stitch through right at the end. And then I'm going to tie it underneath before I do all the pressing. So I'll show you one of those before I move on to pressing all of these darts. So I'm going to go spend some time putting the rest of these darts in, and then we will come back to look at all of them together. Okay, so I've gone ahead and I've sewed my 6 darts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I wanted to show you just pulling the threads through so you'll have all these threads. I'm sorry that you have to watch me thread a needle. Okay, so then I just go through here, pull my thread through. Here, pull my thread through, and then on the back I'm gonna tie off my dart, and then I'm gonna clip it. Okay, now make sure you've tested your fabric so you don't melt it like I melted that illusion, which I feel like I'll never live down to myself that I did that, but and we used a friction pen like I mentioned, so all of the lines are fading. Okay, so there we go. Now we're going to come back and we're going to start attaching the pieces of our skirt together so that we can move towards our invisible zipper. So now what we're going to do is we are going to sew. We want the, oh, oh Jesus, look at the water. Okay, that's it. We gotta get a new iron. Okay, so we have from our clip here, this notch that you have on your pattern piece is actually where you're gonna sew to. Just so we're only sewing here to here. And we're doing this so we get that dramatic leg slit. One thing I'll say is that the position of this leg slit we thought is incredibly flattering and looks really great, but also you could decide to go a little bit lower or a little bit higher depending on your comfort level. So for the red sequin ones, we actually go about an inch higher for our for just like full drama on those pieces. So the important thing when you're doing this is that you want to match your notches up. And you want to match your waistline up. Okay, and then making sure your darts are pressed up. You want to take the time to meticulously, as best you can, get these darts to line up. You want to, again, make sure all of your darts are pressed up when you do this. And this we're going to sew with our narrow zigzag. Okay, and so we're going to stop right at that point. Okay, so here I'm going to clip there we go. We're doing pretty good. Some of my darts are a little off, but I think they look pretty good. So there we go. We are on our way. I'm going to repeat the sewing of this seam on our lining. And then I'm going to go ahead and off camera, I'm going to sew our side seams, just top to bottom. And then we will come back to get ready to install our panties into our lining and then put in our invisible zipper. Okay, so now we're going to attach our panty into our lining. This is our fully assembled lining. Our center back is left open because we're going to install an invisible zipper. And I have my panties here. So what we're going to do now is, this is actually the right side of your lining, which means it's the side that's going to be against your body. So again, you want your darts facing away. This is really important when you're cutting these pieces out to make sure you're cutting everything correctly. Okay, so we have our back of our panties is ready to sit, just free, hang free, but we want to attach the front. Now, I want to make sure when you're thinking about this, you're thinking about the seam allowance lining up. And these panties are a little bit smaller, so you're going to have to stretch them a little. Okay, so I actually put a clip. This isn't something we have on the pattern. Sometimes less is more and you don't want too many notches everywhere. But I just go ahead and I folded this in half to just get that center point to make sure that I'm lining that up. And then here, again, I'm lining the finished line there. Okay, so here you want to make sure that your seam is open. Super important. Okay, pinning here. Okay, so we've got our panties, and similar to our sewing on the rest of this, we're going to use a narrow zigzag here, but I want to make sure that I'm at 1/2 inch and I'm starting directly on that seam line. I'm basting these in. Okay, so now my support panties, just like that's the worst way to describe them. My interior panties, to help hold everything in place, are basted into the front and free hanging on the back. This way they are easy to slide into. I put this together, and you want to go ahead and sew these two, pin them, matching all your notches and seams, and then you want to press towards the bodice. Then I'm going to move this out of the way. Oh, the other thing I did was we have our fusible 1 1/4 inch stay tape here, and you want to press to both sides to 5/8. This is different than a locked zipper because we're installing an invisible zipper. If you have something like the sequins that you can't really press, you could also use chalk or a friction pen to mark 5/8 from the seam, just so that you can make sure you're getting a really proper straight seam for your invisible zipper. So here's an invisible zipper, which if you've ever done a Rita top, you know that, or you've done the slit in our Wanda skirt, we have an invisible zipper in those. So those are some other tutorials you could look at. Okay, the first thing you need to do with an invisible zipper is go ahead and open you want to kind of like, you want to roll out and press open the zipper, because right now the zipper is kind of like rolls back, which it does as you close your zipper, but you want to do this so that it's easier to attach and you get a cleaner line. I do this, I always put a pin holding it in place. This way, when I'm putting tension on it, it's not traveling at all. Okay, so there's one side pressed open, and now I'm going to press open this side. I'm using the tip of my iron to really press into that seam. Okay, so now our zipper is very hot and pressed open. And we are going to start, let's start with doing the right side as worn. Our zipper goes all the way from the skirt all the way through the collar for just a really seamless look. You could put hooks and eyes at the collar if you wanted to, but one of the problems we had was what's the best way to really make sure it's sealed all the way, which is why it's worth pressing this open. It's worth installing an invisible zipper in a stretch. It's going to be worth it, I promise. Okay, so here we have our invisible zipper. Hopefully you can see on the screen this press line at 1.25 inches. And then the thing about an invisible zipper is that you feel like you're putting it on incorrectly, right? Because it feels like, I always feel like I'm like, oh, I want to put this side here, but you don't. You want to have your zipper teeth lined up on that line. And so I'm pinning as close as I can to those zipper teeth. And here at the waist, you want to make sure you have your seam allowance folded up when you press it. Making sure, one of the tricky things about this is really making sure that your waist seam and your collar seam line up on your invisible zipper. So what I want to say there is just when you get to the second side, like we're going to really take our time, because that's one of those things that really helps a garment look finished and come to the next level. Okay. Okay, so here we go. I have changed my foot to a zipper, an invisible zipper foot, which is actually incredibly valuable here. This is how you're going to manage to get close enough. And so when you have an invisible zipper foot, it has these two grooves which line up and make sure that you are sewing directly next to your zipper teeth. Okay. It would be helpful if my machine was plugged in. Guys, what a day. Okay. Okay, now we're gonna sew. I find when I'm doing this, I want to, I go a little further with my needle in place than I would otherwise. The other thing about this is because of the bulk in your collar, I want to make sure that I have those seam allowances open before I stitch. So I put my needle down, lifted my presser foot, and made sure my seam allowance was going in the correct direction. I'm going to do the same thing when I get to the waist. That's what it's called. Okay. Now we've stabilized this, but it is stretch, and I do feel like I like to put just a little bit of tension on both sides of the invisible zipper while I sew it, which is why you want to make sure that you have taken your time to put that crease in correctly. It is a thing that the fabric wants to stretch a little while you're doing this. Here, so let's do here. Just taking my time. Okay, so again, zipper down. I've removed my pin, or I'm sorry, needle down. The zipper's obviously down. And I've folded my seam allowance up because our bodice seam allowance has been pressed. Our waist seam allowance has been pressed towards our bodice. This is a place where you also really want to guide it because it's going through, I have a lot of fabric right there. Okay. That one I'm going to move out. I think I need to readjust that a little bit. And so what this foot does is it lets you sew right in the groove of the zipper, which is super important with an invisible zipper. Okay, I'm going to go right here until I hit against my zipper pull. So we have attached our zipper. We have gone ahead. I like to, once I do one side of my invisible zipper, I like to zip it all the way up. And then I like to very carefully I'm actually going to use the different method. I used like a chalk line here instead of pressing, in case that's something you do. If you're making a sequin version of this, I highly recommend that chalk line method. So the one thing I do is it's really easy for me, I would say, to make like an infinity loop out of this and then to install my invisible zipper upside down. And there's nothing that will make you angrier than when you realize you've done that at the end of a project. So I go through, and with the zipper zipped, I'm going to pin the side and the direction that I'm going to stitch it in and pin it in, because that will help me now. So I'm going to unzip it, and let's move my sleeve board out of the way. So here, actually, I'm lying. I need my sleeve board. I know that this is the exact position I want to get, so I'm going to pin the top of my invisible zipper, and then I can pin through. I'm going to go back and make sure I'm pinning right on the line for the top of that. And again, I like to pin as close as possible. Okay. So I'm going to pin in here. Here I'm gonna zip. This is where it gets tricky. Zip my zipper up. Amazing. So I'm going to do the same thing here and fold this and make sure that my waist seam lines up perfectly. This, I mean, I've had on occasion like done this offset, and then, you know, you just have to, ow, do it again. Okay, let's zip down. Okay, so here we go. So we come to our machine. So you don't have to actually move your needle in the case of an invisible zipper because you have these two separate grooves and the needle goes down the center. So it's like a little treat. Okay. I made sure my seam allowance was up and down here. And it's the same process that we did on the other side of our zipper. So let's see how this went and if I need to go back and zhuzh it a little. Definitely needs to be pressed to smooth that seam out. There we go. That. Oh, look, oh boy, that's a mess. Well, I'm gonna go fix that and I'll be right back. Okay, so I've sewn our zipper. I've re-sewn my zipper to make sure it everything lines up at the waist. But what I want to say is that you know, invisible zippers are a little bit tricky, especially because we're going through multiple layers of stretch at once. So take your time. Don't feel bad. I got it wrong too. Okay, so here I am pinning. We're gonna sew our center back seam. I should probably say that. We're gonna sew our center back seam now. And I'm lining up the hem and I pinned just below our zipper. I'm gonna do this with my invisible zipper foot just to see if I can get just a little bit closer to where I wanna sew. Okay, I want my notches to line up. Okay, we've got a double notch here. So let's come here. The zipper is closed. Let's see. Whoops. We're at a little bit of a zigzag there, so. And I'm just going to continue with my invisible zipper foot, obviously, because I still have my center mark and I still have my 5/8 mark here, so that's going to make it easy for me. I caught my zipper. Well, before I press this open, so I'm going to show you. So once you do this, I caught my zipper. I'm going to have to undo those stitches. It's been a week, guys. It's been a real week. So I caught my zipper. I'm going to undo it and then restitch this one section just to make sure I have a really clean edge there. But what I did notice when I was looking at the caught zipper in that seam is that I didn't get any kind of pucker, which is why you want to sew the seam after you install the invisible zipper. Otherwise, you very often end up with a little bit of a pucker. So let me go tackle that. I'm going to tackle the lining, and then we're going to come back and we're going to put our skirt lining into our fashion fabric skirt, and then we're almost done. So we have we have our bodice up here, we have our skirt. We are down to our last few steps. The most important of which is that we're going to attach the hem. So we want I'm going to fold my support panties out of the way, and we are going to match this where you clipped at the slit. We are going to match this, and we are going to pin the entire hem all along these edges. All right, so we are all pinned. Let's go to sewing. So what we're going to do here is that we actually are going to grade. I'm going to grade my lining smaller than my outer fabric, right? And I'm going to do this all the way around. But what I really wanted to show you guys here, because you know how to grade if you've done any charm patterns before, right? You're going to grade, and then any kind of inner curves you would want to clip into, but these outer curves I wanted to notch into, because when you notch into them and we flip this right side out and we're creating that tulip shape, the seam allowances are going to slightly move over each other or move right next to each other with that notch. And what this will do is make sure you don't have any bubbling. So I'm going to continue this process. We'll go right here just so anyone can see if this is their first time gown, which I commend you if this is your first project with us. Okay, I'm gonna grade this the remainder of the way, and then when I'm done grading this, I'm gonna go ahead, flip my skirt right side so that I have the skirt, the lining hanging outside of the skirt, and then I'm going to understitch. Understitching is optional on this project, but I think it's always a worthwhile step. So we will come back in just a couple of minutes and talk finishing work. So our skirt is understitched, it is attached. I have pulled the lining up through. It's a little hard to understand, not to understand, but to see what's happening here because there's so much going on. So we have one last step. I said that we were moving on to finishing work, and that's because I completely forgot that we have to baste these two layers together. So I am lining my skirt and my front panty up with my center front notch. It's a lot of fabric to go through here, so know that going into it. You're going through many, many layers. So here at our side seam, I'm folding my skirt seam allowance open, and then I'm gonna fold my seam allowance for my panties back so that this way they sit properly. There. And then from here back, you're leaving your panty free. Remember, we put that elastic on to act as a finishing. And match up your darts. And then it says to leave about 2 inches open. For ease, I just like to leave from that last dart open. So what I'll do is I'll stitch from just past the dart towards the center back to make sure I enclose the entire dart in it. Okay, let's add a couple more pins for security, and then I'm going to pin the other side. And then here, I'm just going to put an X. This way I remember to stop stitching. The stitching that you're doing now isn't seam. We are here. We are at the finishing work for our gown. Okay, so if you were interested in putting bra cups into this for support or for shaping or whatever, this would be when you want to do it, because you'll go in between your layers and you can tack your bust cup in place. And once you tack that bust cup in place, it'll give you a little bit more support. So the other things that you have to do, some of our traditional things that we always have to take care of at the end, you're gonna press under 5/8. Sometimes you could do a 1/2 inch, and either you could stitch in the ditch, but I think this is really a case for hand cross stitching this down. I love cross stitch, so I'm never gonna be mad at that. You're gonna do the same thing here. You're going to fold in your seam allowance, and then you're gonna hand stitch this down the side of the zipper. And then we have our armholes. With armholes, I like to put a line of guide stitching in and then clip to that guide stitching, which is at my stitch line, press under, and that makes it easy to put it up against your lining in your sleeves so that you get a really clean finish. So there you are. Here is the Lorelei gown in 600 to 800 easy steps. Anything good takes time. So, okay, so here is our gown, our finished gown with it just needing its finishing work. And like I said, I saw that I did this, my like bar of soap sized burn spot, because I wasn't paying attention with my home iron, so learn from my mistakes. And I am going to create a quick reel with this in the studio so that we can actually see how I would repair this. But I will say here, just to give you an idea, I would want to put this on a dress form to make sure I have a little bit of stretch on it when I'm applying this, because I have 2 separate net illusion layers. And then I think I'm going to do a small roll hem at the top. I'm going to roll hem the sides, and then I'm going to hand stitch that second layer in once I trim out this interior layer, and it should be pretty seamless, hopefully. And we'll show you the finished gown once I do that repair. Thank you all so much.
All right, everyone, that is it, your Lorelei gown. I know that was a lot of steps, so if you got here, congratulations. Also, I did get a text from Andrea while I was traveling that she had a literal meltdown while filming this and burned just a small central hole in the mesh inset. And so I know you guys love it when we mess up on camera, so I think this is great. And we are gonna be doing a little short video showing you how to repair something like that. So coming up this month, the Halloween extravaganza, of course, and we are going to be showing you 2 hacks on this pattern, and they're neckline related, and I think you're going to love them. And then also the expansion on the 15th, which I think is a pattern that you never would have seen coming from me, and I love it. It's so much fun. All right, so stay tuned for all of that fun Halloween content, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.